River of Consciousness, the title of this exhibition for the Hunt Gallery at Webster University in St. Louis, was originally scheduled for November 2020. For obvious reasons, an in-person exhibition was no longer possible. When Jeff Hughes asked if I could do the exhibition virtually, I accepted, but I struggled initially with how to translate an in-person experience into a virtual format. Audience participation was to be an important element of the show. The sculptural work was meant to be interactive, inviting the guests at the opening to handle and rearrange them. I decided that the introducing time through the medium of video would be how I would accomplish this transition to the virtual. I created a stop motion utilizing the sculptures that would move and evolve to simulate and suggest the evolution of a city over time, as well as to suggest the physical participatory nature of the works themselves that demand us to move and recompose them, forming new compositions. The installation of the sculptures, monoprints, paintings, and videos of the stop motion into a physical space created a dialogue between the work and showed the relationships within the works. The dynamic environment, a work itself in evolution, brought the audience into the process and creates a new space for the work to exist. The video that we created documents this process. While I was disappointed that the work was not able to be experienced in person, this new virtual format gave me the opportunity to think about my work in a new way, and through this process, it took my work into a new stage of evolution. For this, I'm grateful and thinking of it as a silver lining on a challenging year. Everything can be moved, and the composition changes, and we see something new that we hadn't seen before.
I think one can become wildly, beautifully excited and ecstatic just by what one is thinking. fan is about to crash into my bedside lamp. I know that there's 6 foot between them, but so far as I'm concerned, they're about to collide. Um, Oddly, though, um, is a couple of researchers here at Harvard have suggested that Rembrandt, uh, with his I'll come on to this a bit later. Rembrandt, with his wide set, slightly divergent eyes, would not have had binocular vision. They feel the same with some other artists who did self-portraits, and they feel, in fact, that binocular vision may interfere with the practice of painting or photography. Photography, of course, most people use a viewfinder, single viewfinder. Of course, I have a stereo camera, but most people don't. Um, and an artist will sometimes look through a tube. And they wondered whether uh, renouncing or not having binocular vision might actually be an advantage to an artist. I, um, I thought this was an absurd theory until I lost my own binocular vision. And now I have to say the world is somewhat like a painting.
documented photographically throughout the entire development of this exhibition. This documentation is an important part of my process, and it helps me think about the next steps and where the work will take me from here. So about 3 years ago, I had been in the studio working on a series of prints utilizing the forms of buildings. I was listening to audiobooks of an author and neuroscientist, Oliver Sacks. These books were in the background as I was working in the studio, and one day I was drawing and thinking and listening to Sacks, and I realized that what I was listening to was speaking to exactly the thing I was struggling with within my work. I'd been thinking about how to show the city from a distance, yet not to be descriptive. I didn't want to create the classic skyline, the static cityscape. I wasn't interested in creating a specific city from a specific vantage point. More, what I was interested in was creating images that reflected the sense of that vastness you feel when you see the city from above in a plane or from afar as a skyline. But I wanted to also include that feeling of abstraction and that loss of perspective that you get when you're inside the city itself. I had recently spent time in New York City and I'd fallen in love with the city. My work prior had mostly been abstract, so the use of the city was fairly new. And it wasn't something that I did intentionally. I think the city just kind of creeped in to my work. I had originally been using just forms that got more and more similar to that of a city, and then, after my trip to New York, I think it just popped out of the work. It was listening to Sacks talk about memory and how memories are created in our brain, and how our memory is not a linear historical narrative that runs and records the inputs and the information accurately for us to then access through memory, but rather Memories are layers, stratifications of information that is pulled in through all our senses, visual, auditory, tactile, and so forth. And it's our attention to those inputs, our ideas and our feelings about those inputs, that then they layer upon one another to create the idea of having experienced a true and real experience of reality, right? Historical narrative. But in fact, what our brains have done is highly personalized. Our personal narrative is very complex and extremely personal. This difference between historical narrative and personal narrative is not something that we're consciously aware of. We have the sense of having experienced things as they truly are, and not as a series of layers. But that isn't necessarily the case. So I'm listening to sax and I'm realizing that something clicked. These layers of memory, that's what I want to capture. I want to make us aware of the layers we build up to form whole memories. I want to create a memory of the city in layers. So the obsessive drawing series came out of that moment in the studio. I'd started with some smaller drawings, right? I was listening and drawing, but and then I did some monoprints and some line drawings. But I then decided I wanted to do a large scale drawing. So also because as an additional element, I wanted our body in relation to the size of the work. So this large drawing took about 50 hours and was done completely freehand in pen. So I had to fully commit when I was drawing, as there wasn't really a margin for error. On a side note, my grandfather always told me to draw with a pen. As a kid, I didn't really understand why, but what I realized later was that drawing with a pen was a way of training yourself to draw with intent. When you draw with a pen, you must commit, and that commitment teaches you to draw with spontaneity and where you really see the quality of line appear. I went on to do a number of other paintings and drawings directly on the canvas in that obsessive series, and then I introduced some color on request of my children. And these drawings led me on to work on a series of paintings, and so I had been working on both the paintings and the drawings at the same time. I was born in Florence, Italy, and I grew up between Florence and the Casentino, where we had our country home. My father and mother moved to Italy in 1968. My father was an artist, printmaker, and had won a Fulbright to study in Florence and then decided to stay. He opened Santa Reparata Graphic Arts Center, printmaking atelier in 1970. My mother and my stepmother are artists. We really are a family of artists. My grandfather, Jim Harmon, was an artist and founded the Art Mart in St. Louis, Missouri. So growing up in an artist family was certainly formative, and art was encouraged and cultivated from a very early age. But I think where I really learned to be creative, or rather to live creatively, was in our countryside. My parents bought a house about an hour outside of Florence, in an 800-year-old abandoned village of 7 houses on the top of the hill called Giogalto, in the Casentino countryside. I was about a year old. It was rough living at first, with no running water or electricity. As children, my brother and I certainly didn't have TV or much in the way of toys. There were also no other kids around to play with, so learning to entertain ourselves with parents who were busy building walls was key. We had free rein to wander around the village from an early age, and I collected objects and old things in the rubble. Everything had the potential to be something else. I imagined myself a little archaeologist hunting through the village to find the vestiges of the past. I started drawing and painting from a very early age, and that was pretty much what I did most of the time. I loved to paint on rocks and collect objects. I really think that my creativity and creative thinking was born out of that experience. That unfettered play of my childhood has translated itself into a process and an approach to art and viewing the world. So we moved as a family to the United States when I was 6, but we spent every summer up on that hill. And I moved to Italy permanently 22 years ago. Along with my father and my stepmother, we refounded and co-founded Ceccile, Santa Reparata International School of Art in 2001. That's the school I am currently the executive director of. So I've recently moved back to our country home, and I guess I've come full circle. As a viewer of my work, we can imagine a camera lens that zooms in and out over the city. When we're fully zoomed in, it is fully abstracted. We see the walls, the details of the walls, the scratches, the shadows, the colors, the marks. As we get further away, the abstractions begin to show the lines of the walls. The city begins to emerge until we see the city as a whole. And then the lens collapses down and those images become layers and they coexist in one space. I work in a lot of different mediums. The photography, like I said, is a really important part, and it goes really in with all of the mediums. I'm constantly recording the work as I go. I document the work in progress. It helps me see the decisions I've made along the way. And I came to the realization that one of the most important part of my process is the layering. And that really, that's whatever I'm doing, I'm constantly working in layers, in the printmaking, in painting, in the sculptures. I like the mutability, the changeability, the fact that I can take something and then think about it in a different way and then think about it yet again in another way. So with my prints, when I first started working in the studio and making monoprints, I wanted to get out of that square rectangle, and so I started tearing the paper down, and then the paper became collaged. And then I started working on Sintra. I'd been working on plexiglass before, and so I started working on Sintra, and I could carve the Sintra, and I could cut the Sintra down into different shapes, and I could continually layer and run the press multiple times. So I'm building an image, and I'm not planning that image. It's not that I would start out and say, okay, I'm gonna put this, and then I'm gonna put this image over that, and then I'm gonna run a yellow through. No, it's very spontaneous. My process is kind of, it's innate in my feeling of what goes next. And I love that spontaneity about it. I love the aha moment when I lift the paper off the press and I'm surprised, as most of the time I am, by what I've gotten. If the line that I was looking for is there, if it's a little bit muted or if it's darker. And I will run a print through the press 4, 5, 6 times, and then I run it again and I get ghosts, so I see the old images appear. I rarely clean my rollers because I like the fact that I can see the history, even of the process, in the prints themselves. They're mistakes, but they're not mistakes. Failure is a huge element to creativity. In fact, I think it might even be the nature of creativity. Making a mistake and learning something from it and solving it is, I think, key to the creative process.